On a July afternoon, Lake Mead looks like exactly the kind of place you'd want to be. Turquoise water set against red rock canyons, boats carving white lines across the surface, families camped along the shore with coolers and lawn chairs, 30 minutes from the Las Vegas Strip. 6 million people come here every year. Since 2007, 317 of them have died here, more than at any other site in the entire national park system. And in May of 2026, the federal agency responsible for those 6 million visitors quietly suspended the dive team that recovers the bodies. Why do people keep dying here, in the same ways, year after year? They arrive on a Friday afternoon, dehydrated from the casino floor, often intoxicated, and look at that blue water like it's the answer to every problem they have. Lake Mead's recreation area spans 1.5 million acres, roughly the size of Delaware, with 750 miles of shoreline, 0 lifeguards, and a ranger force stretched across 2 states. Most visitors treat the lake like an oversized resort pool. They rent houseboats, load coolers, drag inflatable pool toys into open water, and skip the life jackets. It's not hard to see why. Marinas, rental outposts, designated swim beaches, everything communicates managed recreation. The kind of place where someone has already thought about the risks so you don't have to. What the lake actually is today is a deep-water desert reservoir sitting at the bottom of the Mojave, ringed by dark volcanic rock that radiates heat like a commercial oven. Below the glittering surface, the water column hides temperature drops severe enough to stop a human heart, and a 2-decade megadrought has lowered the lake over 170 feet, reshaping its geography faster than anyone can map it. The distance between what visitors expect and what they step into is where the dying starts. The first thing that can kill you at Lake Mead isn't the water, it's the walk to get there. The canyons ringing the lake, Goldstrike, Arizona hot springs, lure hikers with the promise of natural hot springs at the bottom. But the trails drop 750 feet through narrow corridors of black volcanic rock that push ground-level temperatures past 115 degrees. The air is so dry that sweat evaporates before it can be felt on the skin, and hikers drastically underestimate how fast they're losing fluid. By the time the warning signs arrive, the pounding headache, the nausea, the moment the skin stops sweating entirely, core temperature has already crossed 104 degrees. At that threshold, the proteins in the body's cells begin to break apart. The central nervous system shuts down next, then the organs. On April 9, 2025, a group attempted the Arizona Hot Springs Trail in April, months before the infamous summer heat, and one hiker collapsed on the trail and died. 5 others required helicopter evacuation. The very next day, a separate group of 3 adults and 25 children with special needs attempted the exact same trail without adequate water. Rangers had to rescue all 28, and the park shut the trails down early for the season. Every year, these canyons close entirely between May 15th and September 30th. 5 months of the year, the Park Service won't even let you walk in. And while the canyons are deadly, at least the threat is something you can feel. The heat on your skin, the dryness in your throat. The next danger at Lake Mead offers no warning at all. On August 2nd, 2000, 2 brothers, Dylan, 11, and Logan Dixie, 8, were swimming at the rear of a rented houseboat during a family vacation at Lake Powell, the nearest major reservoir upstream on the same river. Their parents had turned on the boat's gasoline-powered generator for one reason, so the kids could watch television in the air conditioning. 15 minutes later, both boys were unconscious in the water. They'd been playing in the cavity beneath the houseboat's rear swim deck, a shaded, calm space that looks like the safest spot on the entire boat. But the generator was exhausting carbon monoxide directly into that cavity, and the architecture of the vessel was holding it there. Carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless, and entirely tasteless. There was nothing to detect. When a boat runs an engine or generator, it creates a low-pressure zone directly behind the stern. Engineers call it the station wagon effect. It works like cracking the rear window of a moving car. The pressure differential pulls exhaust back toward the opening. On a houseboat, that opening is the swim platform. The gas pools right at the waterline, right where people put their faces. The occupational safety limit for carbon monoxide is 35 parts per million. Federal investigators measured the air inside those swim deck cavities and found concentrations of 30,000 parts per million, nearly 1,000 times the safe exposure limit outdoors on a massive open lake. At those concentrations, carbon monoxide latches onto hemoglobin with roughly 200 times the affinity of oxygen, starving the brain and heart. And the victim never feels it coming. The panicked, desperate need to breathe that we associate with suffocation is triggered by carbon dioxide buildup, not oxygen loss. Carbon monoxide skips that warning entirely. The victim feels suddenly, profoundly tired. Their vision narrows. Their grip loosens. They slip below the surface without ever understanding why. Autopsy results on the Dixie brothers showed carboxyhemoglobin saturation of 59 and 52%. They were chemically dead before they ever inhaled water. The investigation expanded to Lake Mead and every major reservoir in the Southwest. And the deaths didn't stop. In 2020, an 11-year-old boy playing on an inflatable raft tied to a rented houseboat at Lake Mead died the exact same way. The generator was running, the gas was pooling, and no one felt a thing. Everything covered so far, the heat, the invisible gas, accounts for a fraction of the death toll here. The rest traces back to a single source, and it's the last one most people would expect. If you want the next investigation like this to show up automatically, subscribing takes 1 second. By far the biggest killer at Lake Mead is the water itself. 110 drownings since 2007, roughly one every 56 days, for nearly 2 decades without a break. And the victims are not who you'd assume. The majority aren't children or weak swimmers. 67% of drowning victims in conditions like these are classified as strong swimmers, and more than half die within 10 feet of safety. The boat they just jumped from, the shoreline they were swimming toward. The single highest concentration of fatalities at Lake Mead falls in the 45 to 54 age bracket, experienced adults who've been in the water their entire lives. They don't die because they get tired. They die because of a flaw in how the human body handles a massive, sudden temperature change. Lake Mead's surface in summer sits above 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It feels warm. It looks inviting. People jump off boats, dive from rocks, wade in from the shore, and the water delivers on its promise, for about the first few feet. Below that, the temperature drops, fast. The lake has a severe thermocline, a transition layer where the water column plunges from sun-warmed to frigid within a matter of feet. 10 feet down, the water can hit the low 50s, colder than your refrigerator. And when you dive from 110-degree desert air into 50-degree water, your body doesn't gently adjust. It short-circuits. The instant cold water contacts your skin, your sympathetic nervous system fires a massive distress signal. Your chest expands involuntarily. You gasp, hard, inhaling 2 to 3 liters of air in a single reflex. If your head is above the surface, that's terrifying but survivable. If your head is under, you've just taken in roughly twice the volume of water required to fatally drown an adult. The lethal threshold is about 1.5 liters. The reflex forces double that into your lungs in under a second. That's cold shock. But it's not the most dangerous part. If a victim manages to keep their mouth shut as their face submerges, a second reflex activates, the diving response. It's a parasympathetic signal through the trigeminal nerve that forces the heart to slow down dramatically, conserving oxygen. Under controlled conditions, it's a survival mechanism. But the cold shock response is simultaneously demanding the exact opposite, screaming at the heart to accelerate. The heart receives both commands at once, maximum acceleration and maximum braking at the same time. Researchers call this autonomic conflict, and the result is a catastrophic collapse of the heart's electrical rhythm, arrhythmia that can shut down coordinated cardiac function entirely. The victim doesn't thrash, doesn't call out. They lose consciousness and sink, sometimes within arm's reach of the boat they jumped from. And it makes sense once you understand it. It isn't a failure of skill or fitness. It's the body's own emergency systems tearing each other apart. Swimming ability becomes irrelevant when the thing killing you is your own heartbeat. On July 14, 1998, Claude Russell Pensinger, a 52-year-old Las Vegas local, went on a solo fishing trip near Boulder Beach. When rangers found his boat, it was still running, engine engaged, circling the open water with no one aboard. Pensinger was gone. His skeletal remains were discovered 24 years later, scattered across the receding shoreline of Boulder Beach, found by park visitors on 3 separate dates in the summer of 2022. Thomas Arendt was 42 when he stepped off the family boat for a late-night swim at Colville Bay in August of 2002. A casual decision, a quick cool-off after a day on the water. The darkness eliminated every visual reference. He struggled, and he drowned before his family could reach him from the deck. His body sank to the bottom and stayed there for 20 years, until 2 sisters paddleboarding across the drastically reduced lake spotted skeletal remains resting on a newly exposed sandbar. DNA confirmed it was Arendt. He wasn't the only one the lake gave back. Donald Smith, 39, drowned at the same marina in April of 1974. The reservoir held him for 48 years. Then in October 2022, a commercial diver noticed a human bone protruding from the newly shallow mud near Colville Bay. The Clark County coroner identified the remains through DNA and ruled the death an accidental drowning, 48 years after the fact. The mega drought that dropped Lake Mead over 170 feet didn't just expose sunken marinas and forgotten boat ramps. It peeled back the floor of a forensic graveyard. Bodies sealed in the deep reservoir for decades surfacing one by one across 2022, including a set of remains discovered inside a corroded metal barrel, a find that launched a homicide investigation into what appears to be a mob killing from decades past. And through all of it, the drownings continue at exactly the same pace. For every 20 feet the water has dropped, the Park Service has spent roughly $6 million relocating marinas, extending boat ramps, and charting navigational hazards that now sit just below the surface. And the agency that's been bleeding resources for 2 decades finally hit the wall. In May of 2026, the Park Service suspended Lake Mead's search and rescue dive team. An internal memo cited severe staffing shortages and equipment that failed to meet operational standards. Federal budget cuts over the preceding years had hollowed the team below the minimum threshold required to safely operate. The deadliest body of water in the national park system now relies entirely on the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for underwater recoveries, an outside agency crossing jurisdictional lines in an environment where survival is measured in seconds. During a comprehensive review of fatalities in 2012 and 2013, park rangers found one statistic that eclipsed everything else. 100% of the drowning victims, every single one, had not been wearing a life jacket. Lake Mead leads the entire national park system in raw deaths, 317 since 2007. That number is real, and it sits above every other site in the country. But it needs context. Over that same period, the lake recorded more than 120 million recreational visits, 6 million a year, every year. When you calculate the mortality rate per 10 million visits, the figure comes to about 26, roughly comparable to the Grand Canyon. And when you stack it against parks with far fewer visitors, the picture inverts entirely. North Cascades National Park in Washington State sees around 30,000 visitors per year. Its death rate per 10 million visits is 601, making it statistically 22 times more lethal to the individual visitor than Lake Mead. Adjusted for volume, Lake Mead drops from 1st to 17th. And that's the distinction that matters. Lake Mead's problem isn't that the environment is uniquely deadly per visit. It's that 6 million people a year cycle through a landscape that punishes the same small set of mistakes with absolute consistency. One drowning every 56 days for 17 years. Put enough people in enough heat near enough cold water, and the math takes care of the rest. So if you're heading to Lake Mead, or any deep water reservoir in the desert, there are a few things worth knowing before you touch the water. First, wear a life jacket. A Coast Guard-approved PFD keeps your airway above the surface during the 1 to 3 minute window of cold shock, when your body is gasping involuntarily and your limbs aren't responding. That window is where the vast majority of drownings begin, and a life jacket is the only thing that buys you time through it. Second, stay off the rear of any boat with a running engine or generator. Treat the swim platform and the space beneath it as a toxic gas zone until at least 15 minutes after everything has been shut off. If you can't see or smell the exhaust, that doesn't mean it isn't pooling at the waterline. Third, do not chase a blown-away pool float into open water. In a desert reservoir where monsoon microbursts can hit 60 miles per hour with zero warning, inflatables act as sails. They'll be a quarter-mile offshore before you can close the distance, and the exertion of swimming after them in deep water with a severe thermocline is precisely the combination that triggers cold shock. And finally, enter the water slowly. Cold shock is a reflex response to the rapid cooling of skin. It can be dramatically reduced by wading in gradually rather than jumping from a boat deck that's been baking in 110-degree sun. None of it requires special training or expensive equipment. It requires understanding that the warm, blue, inviting surface of this lake is a few feet of deception, and everything beneath it operates by a completely different set of rules.